ash drifts like black snow over the riverbank. The air tastes of iron and wet stone. In the trees above Amon Hen, something screams once and is cut short, and the sound drops into the dark like a thrown knife. Footsteps pound through fallen leaves, too many, too close. Far below, a horn calls and breaks, and in the fading light, a single leaf spins down, reed-edged, and lands in blood that is already cooling. If you are enjoying these Middle-earth what-if timelines, like the video and subscribe for more cinematic lore stories. Share your own turning point in the comments and tell everyone where you are watching from. Your ideas shape which road we walk next. Aragorn reached Frodo at the edge of the Seat of Seeing, as if the hill itself had pushed him there. The wind off Nen Hithoel tugged at his cloak and carried the stink of orcs from the trees. Frodo stood rigid, the ring a weight not on a chain but in his chest, and the world around him felt sharpened, too clear, like a blade held close to the eye. Aragorn saw it at once. The decision already made, the loneliness already chosen. The same look he had seen in dying men who knew their last hour and refused to beg. He took one step nearer, and the sound of fighting below rose and fell in ragged waves. "You cannot go alone," Aragorn said, and his voice was low, stripped of command. Frodo did not answer at first. His hand went to the ring, as if it had moved of its own will. "I have to," he said at last. "If I do not, it will take all of you." A cry from the woods cut through them, high and terrified. Not Frodo's, not Aragorn's. A hobbit voice, a distant and desperate, swallowed by barking orc speech. Aragorn flinched as if struck. He looked down the slope where the fellowship had been. He saw flashes of movement, black shapes between trunks, the glint of steel, and the sudden sick knowledge that the company had split not by plan, but by the enemy's hand. For one heartbeat, he stood at a fork that would decide more than roads. In the world that had been meant to be, he would have turned then, because duty has its own gravity. He would have run toward those cries, because a captain does not abandon the helpless. But the ring had changed the rules of every vow ever spoken. Aragorn's mind raced. Boromir was already compromised. Merry and Pippin were untrained. Legolas and Gimli were fierce, but tied to the same doom. And Frodo. Frodo carried the one burden that made all other battles secondary. He saw, with a clarity that felt like prophecy, the eye searching, the Nazgul circling, the black gate opening like a mouth. He saw Gondor's white walls burning. He saw the Shire under smoke. He saw Arwen's face, and then darkness behind it. And he made a choice that tasted like treason. "Then I go with you," Aragorn said, "not as your master, as your shield." Frodo's eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, relief flickered there, quickly buried beneath fear. Aragorn. No. Legolas appeared soundlessly from the trees, bow in hand, his face drawn tight as a drawn string. Gimli stumbled after him, axe already red at the edge, breath steaming. They had followed the sound of Aragorn's voice, and what they found stopped them. Legolas' gaze went past Frodo toward the fighting. His ears caught everything. The orcs' laughter, the crunch of boots, the wet sound of blows. "The halflings," he said, and the word was both question and accusation. "Taken or soon to be," Gimli growled. His chest heaved. "And Boromir with them, if he still stands." Aragorn held their eyes. He could not pretend this was not what it was. "Frodo is leaving," he said. "The ring goes now. If we fail here, no victory elsewhere will matter." Silence, then the howl of an orc horn from below, rising like a taunt. Legolas looked at Frodo, and something old and mournful moved in his face, as if he had seen this story in many tongues. "A small hand carries a world," he said softly, "and the world will try to crush it." Gimli spat into the leaves, furious. "So we let the little ones be dragged to the wizard's tower and call it wisdom?" Aragorn's jaw tightened. In his mind, he saw Merry's wide, determined eyes, Pippin's trembling courage, their laughter in snow at Caradhras. He heard Gandalf's voice, felt the weight of every promise. He tasted bile. "We do not let them," he said, and the words came out harsher than he meant. "We cannot reach them in time. The enemy is between. Frodo cannot wait. We will be hunted from the moment we move." Frodo stepped forward. His voice was small, but it did not break. "If you go after them, you will lose me," he said. "And if you lose me, what then? What then?" The question did not need answering out loud. It hung like smoke. Legolas closed his eyes for a heartbeat, as if listening not to the forest, but to something further away. When he opened them, decision had settled in. "Then I go too," he said. "If darkness is to be entered, it is better with more light." Gimli stared at him as if the elf had spoken madness. Then the dwarf's shoulders sagged with a grief that looked like anger. "And leave 2 hobbits to the knives," he muttered. He lifted his axe again, as if its weight reminded him he was still himself. "Very well," he said. "If the ring is the heart of the enemy, then we strike for the heart. But I will not pretend it does not shame me." Down the slope, Boromir's horns sounded again, broken, desperate, and then stopped. Aragorn moved. He did not run toward the horn. He ran with Frodo into the trees, away from the cries, away from the scattered remnants of the Fellowship, away from the path that might have mended what was breaking. Behind them, the leaves shook with pursuit, and, on the hill of Aemon, Hen, a stone seat, watched the turning of the world with empty eyes. They found Sam on the bank where the boats were hidden, half in water, breath coming in sobs he refused to admit were fear. He had guessed, because Samwise Gamgee always guessed the worst and prepared to endure it. When he saw Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli with Frodo, his face went pale with confusion and then set into a stubborn line. "So, it is all of us then," Sam said. He looked back upriver, toward the woods. "And Mr. Merry and Mr. Pippin?" No one answered quickly enough. The silence answered for them. Sam's hands shook as he tightened straps, as if he could bind the world back together with rope. "We left them," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Aragorn wanted to say something that would make it right. He could not. But he only pushed the boat into the current and stepped in, drawing his hood up as if cloth could hide him from guilt. The river took them, and the sound of orcs behind became smaller until only the wind and the slap of water remained. The last light of day fell behind the hills. Ahead lay Emin Muil, jagged as broken teeth, and beyond that, the dead lands where even the air remembered pain. In the woods they had abandoned, Boromir of Gondor died on his feet, back against a tree, arrow feather trembling at his throat. He had fought like a man trying to buy back a moment. Merry and Pippin had been torn from him by many hands. His last sight was not the white city of his dreams, but a canopy of leaves turning gold. And the last sound he heard was orc laughter and the fading splash of a river carrying away the only salvation he had almost stolen. No one found him. No hands closed his eyes. His horn lay shattered in the fern, and the day darkened around him as if the world itself looked away. Merry and Pippin ran until their lungs burned and their legs failed. They were dragged, kicked, hauled upright again. The orcs argued over them in harsh tongues, and the Uruk-hai of Isengard drove the lesser orcs with fists and whips, snarling about a prize for the White Hand. The hobbits smelled sweat and blood, and the rank breath of creatures that ate raw meat. They tasted dust. They felt the ground pound their feet through thin soles. When Pippin stumbled, a boot caught him in the ribs, and the pain flared white-hot. Merry tried to keep his head. "Do not speak," he whispered when an orc leaned in close. "Do not give them any joy." Pippin nodded, tears streaking down dirt-streaked cheeks, and his fingers found Merry's for a moment in the dark. That small touch was all their courage. They did not know that no footsteps followed their captors now. They did not know that Aragorn's relentless pursuit, meant by fate or by story or by some hidden music, had been broken at its first note. They only knew the night, the running, and the sense of being carried farther and farther from anyone who might save them. By dawn, they were beyond the eaves of the forest, moving west and south toward the Gap of Rohan. Smoke lay on the horizon. The world felt wider and emptier than any Shire tale had prepared them for. And above them, unseen, Crebain wheeled in the grey sky, black dots against cloud, carrying news to a tower where an old mind listened. In Orthanc, Saruman stood at a high window and watched the plain as if it were a board and all lives pieces. He had already set his will against the world, already forged his armies, already lied to himself enough times that truth felt like a foreign language. When the birds brought him word of 2 halflings taken alive, his smile was thin and bright as a knife edge. "Not the ring-bearer," Wormtongue whispered at his shoulder, eager to please. "Perhaps," Saruman said. "Perhaps not." He turned away, robes whispering like dead leaves. "Bring them to me, gently if possible. Hobbits have a way of dying too easily when frightened." Wormtongue bowed and hid his own fear. Somewhere under his flattery, something sour and small asked what payment Saruman would demand for such service. He pushed the thought away. He had pushed away better thoughts than that. Far to the east, in the wet tangles of the dead marshes, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Frodo's little company came to those reeking pools without Gollum's guidance, because Gollum was not yet theirs to command or pity. Instead, Aragorn read the land the way other men read books, and he did not like what he read. "These are old graves," he said, voice tight, "and the dead do not sleep easy." Mist crawled over the water like a living thing. Under the surface, pale faces stared up. Elves, men, orcs. Eyes open, mouths slack. Sam gagged and turned his head away. Gimli's boots sank into spongy ground. "I have walked in mines where the air was foul," he muttered. "But this is wrought with memory." Legolas did not speak much. The elf's face had grown drawn since Amon Hen. He moved like a green shadow, but his eyes kept searching the horizon as if he expected to see 2 small figures running to catch up. The forest behind them felt like a wound. Frodo walked in the middle, hood up, hand often at his breast. The ring pulled at him more strongly here, nearer to Mordor, as if it sensed home. Sometimes he staggered, and Aragorn's hand would steady him. At night, they did not dare make a fire. The cold sank into bones, and the damp crept through cloaks. Sam whispered to Frodo when the others pretended to sleep. "Mr. Frodo," he said, "do you think Mr. Merry and Mr. Pippin, do you think they are alive?" Frodo's eyes shone in the dark. "I do not know," he whispered back, "and that is worse than any answer." In the morning, as they skirted a pool where dead hands seemed to press up under the surface, a sound came, a soft slither, a breathy hiss. Aragorn turned, sword half drawn. Legolas' arrow was nocked in an instant, the point aimed at a shape crouched among reeds, eyes gleaming like wet stones. Gollum had been following, drawn by the ring as a starving thing is drawn by meat. He had been patient because hunger teaches patience, but he had not expected so many. His gaze flickered over Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. It paused at Frodo and sharpened to an agony of longing. "Precious," he breathed, and it was both prayer and curse. Sam made a small choking sound. His hand went to his frying pan as if it were a weapon fit for legends. Aragorn stepped forward. "Come," he said, and his voice was command laid bare. "Show yourself. No tricks." Gollum's thin fingers tightened around a reed. His body trembled, not with fear exactly, but with calculation. He had planned to take Frodo in the dark, to whisper lies, to lead him to webs and hunger. Now there were too many blades, too many eyes. Legolas' arrow did not waver. "One shot," he said, voice like winter. Then silence. Gollum's pupils widened. He hissed, and his gaze darted to Frodo again, seeking softness, seeking the crack in resolve that pity always made. Frodo stepped toward him, and the movement surprised the others. "Do not shoot," Frodo said. Legolas' bowstring creaked, but he did not release. Frodo's voice trembled. "He is wretched," he said, "but he knows the way, and I cannot do this without help." Aragorn watched Frodo closely. He saw the mercy there, and he saw something else too, the ring using mercy as a chain. He had asked himself in the first days of this road how many times Frodo would be forced to choose between hard necessity and the gentler path. The answer, it seemed, was always. "Bind him," Aragorn said at last. They caught Gollum by surprise, because he had not believed they would approach him openly. Gimli's hands were strong, and the rope bit into thin wrists. Gollum shrieked and thrashed. Sam flinched, but did not let go. "Sméagol," Gollum croaked, as if the name were a wound. Sméagol promised. "To whom?" Gimli snarled. "Yourself?" Gollum's eyes rolled toward Frodo. "To Master," he whispered. "To Precious." Frodo swallowed. "To me?" he said, and the title sat strangely on his tongue. "If you help us, you will not be harmed." A faint smile twitched at the corner of Gollum's mouth, and it did not look like gratitude. Now it looked like someone finding the first loose stone in a wall. Rohan, meanwhile, lay under a sky the color of old tin. Wind swept the plains, bending grasses in long waves, and smoke from distant farmsteads rose thin and uncertain. Riders passed empty cottages where doors hung open, and the smell of burnt thatch clung to everything. Theoden sat in Meduseld with his head bowed. Wormtongue's voice was near him always, soft as wool over a mouth. There was no Aragorn now to stride into that hall and throw open windows. No stranger with a reforged sword to shame the courtiers into remembering themselves. Gandalf still came, because Gandalf did not rely on chance alone, but his timing was different, and so was the welcome he received. The doors of the Golden Hall opened to grey light, and Gandalf entered with Éomer's guards suspicious behind him. He found Theoden thin, eyes dim, hands trembling. He found Wormtongue smug and watchful. "I come to speak with the king," Gandalf said. "You come to sow unrest," Wormtongue replied smoothly. "The king is weary. He has suffered much. He needs peace." Gandalf's staff tapped once on the floor, a small sound that nevertheless seemed to straighten a few spines. "Peace," he said, and the word was heavy. Or sleep? Theoden looked up slowly, as if waking through water. "Mithrandir," he murmured. Recognition flickered like a weak flame, and then faltered. Gandalf saw then what he had suspected, and what he had feared. Saruman's shadow had deepened. It was not merely counsel, it was a net. Gandalf felt time slipping like sand through fingers. He had hoped for Aragorn, for Legolas, for Gimli. Strong arms in the right place at the right moment. He had hoped, or without admitting it, for story to repeat itself the way songs did. But Middle-earth was not a song. It was a battlefield. Outside Edoras, snow began to fall in small, hard grains, and a shepherd watched from a hillside as wolves moved in the distance, too organized to be natural. The shepherd had never heard of Orthanc. He only knew his sheep were restless and the sky smelled wrong. In Ithilien, Faramir's rangers lay in damp fern and watched the road from the Black Gate. They wore green and brown and smelled of earth, and their eyes missed little. They had heard rumors carried by fleeing folk that a halfling bore the enemy's treasure, that a ranger had become a king, that the world was ending in small steps. One evening, as the sun bled red behind Efelduath, a scout returned to Faramir with news. 4, the man whispered, and a 5th, a creature. They keep to shadows, but they travel with purpose. One is an elf, one a dwarf, and one a man. Tall, hard to miss. Faramir's mouth tightened. An elf and a dwarf so far east meant only one thing. The fellowship had broken, but its pieces were still moving. And a tall man with them could be any ranger, any wanderer, or it could be someone who had been spoken of in half-believed tales. "Bring them," Faramir said, quietly. "No arrows, unless you must." His men melted into the trees. On a narrow path between thorn and stone, Frodo felt the first true pinch of Mordor's nearness. Not just dread, but a sense of being observed, as if the land itself had eyes. Gollum crept ahead, tugging at the rope, hissing complaints under his breath. "Smeargol does not like this," he muttered. "Orcs, men, bad air, bad light." Sam walked behind Frodo, a jaw clenched. He had not stopped thinking of Merry and Pippin since Amon Hen, and the guilt sat on him like a sack of wet sand. He watched Gollum with a hatred that was almost a comfort, because hatred had an object and guilt did not. Aragorn scanned the ridges. He had chosen stealth over speed now, because speed without secrecy was suicide this close to the enemy's lands. Yet he could not shake the feeling that their very numbers made them louder. 4 companions and a captive could not vanish the way 2 hobbits might have. Every snapped twig seemed to ring like a bell. Legolas paused suddenly, one hand lifted. The elf's head tilted, listening. "What is it?" Gimli whispered. "Men," Legolas said. "Near." The next moment, arrows appeared from the undergrowth, not loosed, but aimed. Rangers stepped out, faces stern, blades drawn. Their leader was grave-eyed, dark-haired, with the look of one who had learned to carry duty like a wound. "I am Faramir, captain of Gondor," he said, and his gaze fixed on Aragorn as if pulled by magnet. "And you are far from any road that welcomes strangers." Aragorn stepped forward, hands open, a peace gesture that still showed confidence. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn," he said, "and we seek only passage." A flicker passed through Faramir's men. The name was not unknown. It had moved like a rumor through Gondor. Isildur's heir living, the northern Dunedain still watching. Denethor had dismissed it as hopeful nonsense. But here the rumour stood in flesh. Faramir's expression did not change much, but his eyes sharpened. "If that is true," he said quietly, "then the world has more surprises than I thought." Frodo felt suddenly small amid talk of kings. He pulled his hood lower, trying to disappear, and the ring warmed against his skin as if amused. Faramir's gaze slid to Frodo. It lingered a fraction too long. "And who is this?" he asked. Frodo's throat tightened. Aragorn answered before Frodo could. "A friend," he said. "One who must not be delayed." There was a moment then, a stillness thick as fog. Faramir's men waited. Gollum whimpered, eyes darting. Sam's hand tightened on the strap of his pack. Faramir stepped closer, voice lowered so only Aragorn could hear. "My brother died," he said. "Not long ago. Boromir. Did you see him?" The question was a blade. Aragorn felt it twist. He had not seen Boromir fall. He had heard the horn. He had turned away. The guilt he carried suddenly had a name and a face. "I heard his horn," Aragorn said, "and I did not go." Faramir's eyes narrowed, pain flickering now. "Then he died alone." "Yes," Aragorn said. He did not flinch. He died buying time. Faramir's jaw worked as if he chewed on anger. He looked away toward the east, toward the black shadow of Mordor. "All of us are buying time," he said. Then he looked back at Frodo again. "And what do you buy it with, halfling? What do you carry that draws such company to you?" Frodo's breath caught. The ring seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat not his own. Here was one of the questions planted like a seed at Amon Hen, now reaching up through soil. Could the ring be kept secret when kings and captains stood near? Could any oath hold when suspicion found the right shape? Frodo opened his mouth, and for a moment the world narrowed to the taste of fear and the sound of distant water. Then Sam stepped forward, voice sudden and sharp. "He carries hope," Sam said, "and he is tired. If you are a decent man, you will let us pass." Some of Faramir's men bristled. Faramir studied Sam, and something like reluctant respect passed over his features. "You are brave," he said, "or foolish." "Both," Gimli muttered. Faramir's gaze went to the creature bound by rope. "And that?" Gollum hissed. "Smeagol. Smeagol helps." "Smeagol lies," Sam said at once. Aragorn watched Faramir struggle with the pieces. A halfling under strain, an elf and a dwarf far from their homes, Isildur's heir walking like a common ranger, and a creature of the dark slinking at their feet. He could see in Faramir's face the temptation to seize what he did not yet understand, and carry it to Minas Tirith as a weapon. Faramir was Boromir's brother. He was Denethor's son. He was a man of Gondor, and Gondor was starving. But Faramir surprised himself, and everyone else. "There is a shadow on you," he said to Frodo, voice softer. "I do not know its shape, but I have felt such shadows before, in dreams and in the cold counsel of my father. If you carry a thing that cannot be handled safely, then any hand that grabs for it will burn." He turned to Aragorn. "Go," he said, "but hear this. Minas Tirith will fall unless help comes. And if you are who you say you are, the White City will call your name, even if you do not answer." Aragorn bowed his head. "It is already calling," he said, "and I am already failing it." Faramir stepped back, and his rangers melted away again, leaving only the smell of crushed fern and the echo of near disaster. As the Fellowship's splinter moved on, Gollum's eyes followed the disappearing men with a calculating glint. He had expected to play one side against another, and now a new piece had entered, the name of Aragorn. Kings meant armies. Armies meant chaos. Chaos meant opportunity. And somewhere in the dark of his mind, Shelob stirred at the scent of promised meat. In Isengard, Merry and Pippin were thrown into a stone chamber that stank of old urine and damp. Their wrists were raw from bindings. Their mouths tasted of fear. Saruman came to them not with a whip, but with a voice. He wore white still, though it seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. He looked down as if at animals that might speak if trained. "Hobbits," he said, "so small, so stubborn. Tell me, where is the ring?" Merry swallowed and tried to keep his voice steady. "We do not know." Saruman smiled faintly. "You know," he said. "Perhaps you do not know that you know, but pain has a way of teaching memory." Pippin trembled. Merry's hand found his again in the dark, and the touch was both comfort and farewell. Saruman did not torture them at first. He offered them food. He offered them blankets. He spoke softly of safety, of how the world was changing, of how clever folk adjusted. He spoke of the Shire with alarming detail, the brandywine, the party tree, the very taste of mushrooms. "Do you think your land will be spared?" Saruman asked, and his eyes were bright. "Do you think any corner remains hidden?" Merry felt cold spread in his stomach. Saruman knew. Saruman had eyes everywhere. And if Saruman could reach the Shire, what did that mean for everyone they loved? "What do you want?" Merry asked, and his voice came out hoarse. Saruman leaned closer, and his breath smelled faintly of smoke. "I want what everyone wants," he said. "Power. Order. An end to the chaos of failing kings. Your friends have something that will decide the age. Tell me where they go, and I will spare you. And perhaps I will spare your little land." It was a lie. Merry heard it the way one hears a false note in a song. But lies did not have to be true to be dangerous. Pippin suddenly spoke, and the words surprised even him. "If you know so much," he said, "why do you ask us?" Saruman's eyes narrowed. A brief flash of irritation crossed his face. For a heartbeat the mask slipped, and beneath it was hunger, not merely for the ring, but for certainty. Because he did not know. Because even Saruman's web had holes. He straightened. "Very well," he said. "Perhaps you will be more useful alive than broken." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Bring me news of the halfling called Frodo," he said to his servants outside. "And if you find him, do not kill him. Not yet." When the door closed, Merry exhaled shakily. "He knows our names," he whispered. Pippin's eyes were wide. "And he knows the Shire," he said. In the forests of Fangorn, the trees listened. They had listened to axes for too long. They had listened to orcs. They had listened to the distant grinding of Isengard's wheels. But there were no hobbits now stumbling into their shadowed halls to speak of sunlight and pipeweed. No small voices to remind the oldest living things what they had once protected. Treebeard walked slowly under the boughs, each step a groan of wood and earth. He paused by a stream and lowered his face to the water. His reflection was old, and behind him the forest stood like an army that had forgotten it was an army. He heard, faintly, the sound of distant chopping. He rumbled, and a sound like thunder thinking. "It is not time," he murmured. "Not yet. The Ents did not march. Not yet." And the world, which in another thread might have seen Isengard drowned beneath roots and flood, instead watched smoke rise thicker from Orthanc day by day. In Rohan, Gandalf finally broke through Wormtongues, net by force of will alone. He drove Grima back with words like blows, and Theoden's eyes cleared as if a window had been opened in a room long shut. But the cost of delay was immediate and brutal. The riders who should have gathered earlier were scattered. Villages burned before warnings arrived. Saruman's armies did not move like an enemy to be met on a field. They moved like a disease, creeping and then striking. When Theoden at last rode to Helm's Deep, the sky was low and full of rain. The people huddled under cloaks, women carrying infants, old men leaning on sticks, children silent with shock. The fortress loomed, ancient stone under a curtain of water, and the smell of wet horses and fear filled the air. Without Aragorn, there was no tall northern captain to stand on the deeping wall and make men remember stories. There was no elf prince beside him to steady the archers with unearthly calm. There was no dwarf to laugh at death and shame despair into retreat. There was only Theoden, weary but awake at last, and Eomer, fierce and frustrated, and the men of the Mark, brave and too few. The Uruk-hai came at dusk, torches like a crawling line of fire. Their drums were a steady heartbeat, and in that rhythm, men heard doom. Gandalf stood with Theoden and watched the enemy gather. "This is the storm you delayed," he said quietly, not as accusation, but as fact. Theoden's hands tightened on the parapet. "Then we will endure it," he said. His voice shook once, then steadied. "We will endure, or we will end." In Mordor's shadow, Frodo began to understand that having Aragorn near was both comfort and danger. The ranger's presence drew respect from men and fear from orcs, but it also drew the ring's attention in a different way. The ring loved strength. It admired bloodlines. It whispered of thrones. At night, as they lay under a rock overhang, Frodo heard Aragorn murmuring in sleep. Not words, but sounds of struggle, and he wondered what dreams the ring showed him. Was it Arwen's face fading? Was it Minas Tirith burning? Was it a crown on his own brow, heavy and rightful? Frodo's pity for Aragorn twisted into a strange fear. The burden of the ring was not only his, it reached for every heart nearby. The closer they came to Mordor, the more Frodo felt like a lit torch carried through dry grass. Gollum sensed it too. He watched Aragorn often, eyes narrowed. He had feared Gandalf once, feared the elves, feared even fat hobbits when angered. But this man was different. This man had a will like iron. It would be delicious to bend. One evening, under a sky smeared with red dust, Gollum began to speak softly to Frodo when the others walked ahead scouting. "Master is tired," Gollum whispered. "Master is kind, but Master has bad friends. Big man wants precious." Frodo's throat tightened. "He does not," he said, and he tried to believe it. Gollum's grin flashed quick as a lizard's. "Big man is king," he hissed. "Kings take. Kings always take." The words landed like seeds in poisoned soil. Frodo hated that they found purchase. Later, when Aragorn returned from scouting, he found Frodo sitting alone, staring towards the black ridge of Ethel Duath. Aragorn sat beside him, careful not to crowd him. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried faint sounds, distant thunder, or perhaps the rumble of armies. Aragorn broke the silence. "You fear me?" he said, and it was not accusation. It was sorrow. Frodo swallowed. "I fear what the ring does to all of us," he said. Aragorn nodded slowly. "So do I," he said, "and I will tell you what I have not told you yet." He looked at his hands, as if seeing bloodlines there. "In my youth, I wanted the throne of Gondor like a thirsty man wants water. Then I learned what it costs. A crown is not a reward. It is a chain. Frodo looked at him, and was surprised by the openness. Aragorn's voice lowered. "The ring offers me a crown without the chain," he said. "It offers me victory without loss. It offers me Arwen without farewell. That is how I know it is lying." Frodo's eyes stung. "And what if it does not lie?" he whispered, because the thought was a knife he could not stop touching. Aragorn's gaze snapped to him, fierce. "Then Middle-earth is already dead," he said. "Because if the ring can give such things, it will take everything to pay for them." Frodo looked away, and the wind brushed his face like cold fingers. Somewhere behind them, Sam watched, and in his chest, a small, ugly jealousy stirred. Not of Aragorn's nobility, but of Frodo having anyone else to lean on. Then shame followed, because Sam knew jealousy had no place here. And yet, the heart did not always obey the mind. Questions hung over them like low clouds. Could Aragorn's strength be trusted all the way to the crack of doom? Could Legolas' ancient calm survive the slow grinding of Mordor? Could Gimli's stubborn courage endure when there was nothing left to swing an axe at but despair? And what of the hobbits left behind? Were they already dead? And if so, did their deaths buy anything at all? At Helm's Deep, the first assault smashed against the wall like a wave of iron. Arrows hissed, men shouted. The rain turned the ground to mud, and bodies sank into it. The Uruk-hai came with ladders and hooks, with torches that hissed in the wet, with a discipline that made them more terrifying than any rabble. Yoma fought with the ferocity of a man trying to cut down regret. He looked again and again along the wall, as if expecting to see a tall ranger appear beside him, sword shining, voice lifting the men. He saw only tired faces and the flash of orc blades. The wall held through the first night. It might have held through the second. But Saruman had learned from ancient wars. He did not only batter walls, he broke them. At midnight, a blast tore the culvert apart. Fire bloomed in the rain, unnatural and bright, and stone leapt outward as if the mountain itself had coughed. Men were thrown screaming into mud. A gap yawned, and Uruk surged through with a roar that drowned even thunder. Theoden watched the breach and felt something inside him go very still. "So," he said, and the word was not despair, but grim acceptance. "It ends here." Gandalf's eyes were hard. "Not yet," he said, but his voice held less certainty than before. He had meant to ride for help, to gather Erkenbrand and the scattered riders. He would still try, but he knew, in that moment, that story had changed. Help might come too late. He turned to ride out into the storm, white cloak snapping like a banner of stubborn hope. And as he vanished into rain, the people of the deep watched him go, as if watching the last light leave their world. In Isengard, Saruman grew impatient. Merry and Pippin had given him nothing but stubborn denial and small defiant silences. He had tried charm, he had tried threat. At last, he tried something else. He showed them a palantir. The seeing stone sat on a black cloth like a captured star. Saruman's fingers hovered over it as if caressing a wound. "Look," he said softly, "and tell me what you see." Merry's heart hammered. He remembered Gandalf's warnings, half understood. He shook his head. "No." Saruman's eyes hardened. "You will," he said. Two guards held Merry's shoulders. Saruman forced Merry's face toward the stone, and the world fell away. Merry saw fire, He saw a lidless eye, vast and searching. He saw a tower of iron and a plain of ash where armies moved like ants. He saw the Shire, and for a heartbeat, relief flared. Green hills, a lane, a familiar hedge. Then black-clad riders swept through it, and smoke rose from hobbit holes. Merry screamed, and the scream tore his throat raw. He tried to turn away, but the eye caught him, and in that gaze he felt himself peeled open like fruit. Then Saruman broke the contact, and Merry collapsed, shaking. Pippin sobbed. "What did you do?" he whispered. Saruman's voice was pleased, almost gentle. "Now the enemy knows your scent," he said, "and so do I. Your little land will be useful. Pain makes pathways. Thank you. It was not only cruelty, it was strategy." Saruman had just sent a message into the dark. The Shire existed, and it mattered. It was an unexpected revelation that would ripple outward like poison in water. That night, when the guards dozed, Merry lay awake, eyes staring into darkness, and he realized with icy clarity that their capture had not merely endangered them. It had opened a door to everything they loved. He turned his head toward Pippin. "We have to get out," he whispered. Pippin's voice was small. "How?" Merry swallowed, tasting blood where he had bitten his tongue. "Anyway," he whispered, "even if only one of us does." In Ithilien, the small company reached Henneth Annan, and for a brief time they rested in a hidden refuge where water fell cool and clear, and the sound of it was almost enough to make Sam weep. He washed his hands and watched black grime run off, and for a moment it felt like washing away guilt. It did not last. Frodo sat near the pool, eyes distant. The ring's pull was stronger now. Sometimes he spoke to no one, lips moving. Sometimes he stared at Aragorn with an expression that looked like distrust and love tangled together. Legolas watched Frodo too. The elf had lived through ages and seen the slow decay of light, but he had not seen innocence corrode so quickly. It unsettled him more than battle. Gimli sat apart, sharpening his axe with steady strokes. The sound was comforting. It was something simple in a world where everything else was a riddle. Gollum crouched in shadows, bound but allowed to move within a short rope. He stared at the water with hatred, as if purity offended him. Aragorn spoke with Frodo that night in a low voice. "We cannot go through the Black Gate," he said. "Not with this company, not with our luck." Gollum's head snapped up. "No, no," he whispered eagerly. "Black Gate is watched, very watched, but Smeagol knows another way." Sam's eyes narrowed. "The way you wanted to take him," he said. "The way with the spider." Gollum hissed and bared teeth. "Stupid fat hobbit," he spat. "Always spoiling." Frodo looked at Gollum, and pity and exhaustion made his voice soft. "Show us," he said. Aragorn's hand tightened on his sword hilt. He did not trust Gollum, yet he did not see another path. And in that moment, he understood something grim about leadership. Often it was choosing between two evils and praying the smaller one did not grow teeth. They turned south toward the mountains of shadow. As they climbed, air thinned and grew colder. The world changed from green to grey to black. The sun was a pale coin behind smeared cloud. The stone underfoot was sharp, and when Sam slipped, his knee split and bled bright against soot-dark rock. By the time they reached the hidden stair, the sky to the east had turned an ugly orange. Mordor breathed beneath it, heat and smoke rising like the exhale of a sleeping beast. Shelob's pass waited above, a wound in the mountain. The air there was stale and smelled faintly sweet, like decay masked by something alluring. Legolas paused at the entrance, every instinct screaming. "There is ancient evil here," he said quietly. His voice held a rare edge of fear. Gimli grunted. "Then we kill it," he said, as if stubbornness could simplify the world. Gollum's eyes gleamed. "Yes," he whispered. "Kill it! Go in!" Aragorn turned to Frodo. "This is the last chance to turn back," he said, knowing it was not truly a chance. "If we go in, we may not come out." Frodo's face was pale. The ring felt like a hot coal. He nodded anyway. "We go on," he said. Inside, darkness swallowed them. The sound changed. Their footsteps sounded muffled, as if the very air was thick. There was no breeze, only a faint whisper that could have been wind or could have been many legs moving in distant corners. Sam's breath came fast. He muttered under his breath, half prayer, half stubborn talk. "Just a tunnel," he said. "Just a nasty old tunnel." Then something brushed his shoulder. Sam froze, skin crawling. He turned slowly. Nothing. Only darkness. They moved deeper. The tunnel narrowed, then widened into a chamber where the floor was sticky. Gimli's boot lifted with a faint sucking sound. He muttered a curse. Legolas' eyes narrowed. He could see more than the others, and what he saw made his face tighten. Webbing. Layers of it, old and thick. Frodo's breath hitched. The ring pulsed like a living thing, and for a moment he felt a strange kinship with the darkness, as if the ring recognized the spider and greeted it like a cousin. A sound came then, a low chitter, almost like laughter. From above, a shape descended. Shelob was not merely a spider. She was hunger-made flesh, ancient and vast. Her belly bloated, her legs thick as small trees. Her eyes were clustered and dull, reflecting nothing human. Her stench hit them like a wave, rot, venom, old prey. Sam gagged. Gimli roared and swung his axe, but Shelob moved with shocking speed, jerking back and then lunging. Her sting flashed, and it struck not at Frodo first, but at the largest threat. It pierced Gimli's side. The dwarf's roar turned into a gasp. He staggered, axe dropping. Venom spread fast, a cold fire racing through veins. "Gimli!" Aragorn shouted, and he leapt forward, sword up. Legolas loosed arrows in a blur, but the shafts glanced off hard chitin. Shelob hissed, and the sound vibrated in bone. Frodo stood frozen for a heartbeat too long. The ring's presence made him feel exposed, as if Shelob could see it glowing in his chest. Then Sam shoved him hard. "Move!" Sam shouted, voice cracking. "Move, mister!" "Frodo!" Aragorn drove his blade into one of Shelob's legs, and black ichor splattered, stinking. Shelob recoiled, then struck again, and this time Aragorn felt the sting graze his shoulder, slicing cloth and skin. Pain flared, but he kept his feet. Legolas drew a long knife and sprang onto a web-thick pillar, moving like a dancer in nightmare. He slashed at strands, trying to free space, trying to keep Shelob from pinning them. Gimli tried to rise. His face was grey. "Leave me," he rasped, and it was the first time he had ever sounded old. "Do not waste." Sam did not look at him. Sam grabbed his cooking pot and swung it with all the desperation of a gardener protecting his only rose. The iron rang against Shelob's jaw, and the spider shrieked, a sound like tearing cloth. Shelob turned towards Sam, enraged. Her front legs rose, blotting out what little light there was. And in that moment, Gollum moved. He had been waiting for this. Chaos, blades, terror. He slipped his bindings against a rock edge for days now the rope gave way. He darted toward Frodo, eyes fixed not on Shelob, but on the ring. "Precious," he hissed. Frodo turned just as Gollum grabbed him, clawing at his shirt. Frodo stumbled, and the chain of the ring snapped under the strain, the ring dropping into Frodo's palm. Time narrowed to a point. In that point, Frodo felt the ring's smooth gold, felt its warmth, felt its promise. He could vanish. He could escape. He could leave them all. He could end their suffering by ending their lives. He could do anything. Aragorn saw the ring in Frodo's hand, and for a fraction of a second, he saw it on his own finger instead. Saw armies bow, saw Mordor broken. He saw Minas Tirith saved, saw Arwen's tears turn to joy. The ring's whisper slid into his mind like oil. "Take it," it said. "You can bear it. You are stronger than a hobbit. You were meant for this." Aragorn's hand trembled. Then Gimli, half paralyzed, reached out blindly and seized Aragorn's boot with a grip like stone. His voice was a rasp, almost inaudible. "Do not," he whispered. It was not a lecture. It was not philosophy. It was a friend's dying plea. Aragorn's eyes snapped clear. He roared. Not at Shelob, not at Gollum, but at the ring itself, as if sound could drive temptation away. He slammed his shoulder into Gollum, hurling the creature back. Gollum hit the web-strewn floor and skittered, snarling. Shelob lunged again, and in the scramble her sting struck Gimli once more, deep. The dwarf convulsed. His eyes rolled. His hand slipped from Aragorn's boot and fell limp. Gimli, son of Glóin, died in darkness, far from any hall of stone, his last gift not a blow struck but a warning given. The loss hit like a physical blow. Aragorn's breath caught. Legolas made a sound that was not quite a cry, and his knife hand faltered for one dangerous instant. Sam saw Gimli fall, and grief flashed through him so sharp it felt like anger at the world itself. "No," he whispered, and then louder, "No." The fight became desperate. Legolas, with a sudden clarity that felt like cold sunlight, drew out the light of Eärendil that Galadriel had given Frodo. He had taken it earlier, quietly, because he had known Frodo's hands would not always be steady. Now he flung the phial upward, and its light burst in the chamber like a star. Shelob recoiled, hissing, legs scrabbling, eyes shrinking from brightness she had not faced in long ages. The light showed the webs, the bones caught in them, the sticky filth. It showed Gimli's body on the ground, small in death despite his strength. Aragorn drove forward with Andúril, and this time the blade bit deep into Shelob's underbelly. Black blood poured out, stinking. Shelob shrieked and fled, retreating into side tunnels, her huge body vanishing with surprising speed, leaving only trembling webs and the echo of her rage. Silence fell, broken only by Sam's ragged breathing and the drip of black ichor. Then they heard Gollum scrambling away. Legolas moved like lightning, arrow knocked even in the cramped dark. He loosed, and the arrow struck Gollum through the shoulder, pinning him briefly to a web strand. Gollum screamed, a thin sound full of hatred. "Kill him," Sam snarled, stepping forward, eyes wild. Frodo clutched the ring in his palm, shaking. He looked at Gollum pinned there, writhing, and pity rose again like an illness. "No," Frodo whispered. Aragorn turned, and his face was hard in a way Frodo had not seen before. "He will betray us again," Aragorn said. "He has already tried to take it." Frodo's voice broke. "I cannot," he said. "I cannot be the one to decide who dies." Aragorn's jaw tightened. He looked at Gimli's body, and grief turned to something colder. "Then I will," he said. Legolas' bow lowered slightly, surprise flickering. The elf's loyalty to Aragorn was deep, but he had not expected Aragorn to take that step. Aragorn walked to Gollum. Gollum's eyes, huge with pain, fixed on the ring in Frodo's hand. "Precious," he gasped. Aragorn drew his dagger. For a moment he hesitated, not out of mercy, but out of knowledge. If Gollum died, they lost a guide, a pathfinder in the last maze. But if he lived, he was poison walking. "What is the worth of one life weighed against the world?" Aragorn murmured, and it was one of the few times he sounded like a king already, making judgments. He drove the dagger in. Gollum's body jerked, then sagged. His eyes stayed open, fixed on nothing. His mouth moved once, soundless, as if still trying to say the name of his treasure. The unexpected death did not feel like victory. It felt like a door closing. It felt, strangely, like fate being defied. Sam stared, breathing hard, and a grim satisfaction flickered in him before guilt smothered it. Frodo turned away and retched, the ring clenched in his fist, as if he could squeeze the horror out of it. Legolas looked at Aragorn for a long moment, and something shifted between them, a subtle but real. The elf had seen killing, had killed plenty, but this was different. This was execution, cold and deliberate, and it marked Aragorn in a way battle never could. They buried Gimli where they could, under stones in the dark, because there was no earth to dig. Aragorn placed the dwarf's axe across the cairn. Legolas laid a small green leaf there, absurdly bright against black rock. Sam whispered. He deserved a proper grave, and his voice shook. Aragorn said nothing. Words were too small. When they emerged from the pass, dawn was a sickly smear over Mordor's plain. The air was hot and tasted of ash. The land stretched out like a scar, cracked earth, slag heaps, smoke vents. Far away, Barad-dûr rose, a black spike against the sky, and the eye above it seemed almost visible in the shifting cloud. Frodo looked out and swayed. Sam grabbed his arm. Legolas stood very still, as if his immortal senses struggled to accept such ugliness. Aragorn looked east and felt, for the first time, the full weight of the choice at Amon Hen. He had brought strength to the ring-bearer. He had also brought visibility. He had also brought a blade that now had Gollum's blood on it, a blood that in some other thread might have spilled at the edge of the fire itself. How did one measure such things? How did one know which mercy was wisdom and which was simply fear of being stained? They moved onto the plain disguised as best they could. Cloaks pulled tight, faces smeared with ash, steps timed to avoid patrols. Yet their very stature betrayed them. A hobbit could vanish behind a rock the size of a chair. Aragorn could not. Legolas, though slender, and carried an otherworldly grace that caught the eye. Sam was stout and sweating, and his muttered curses at the heat sounded too human in a land that hated humanity. Orc patrols crisscrossed the plain. Their voices carried coarse laughter, arguments, orders. The smell of them was foul, but worse was the smell of the land. Sulphur, burnt meat, stagnant water. Sam's stomach rolled. They had no guide now. Gollum was dead, and with him the secret ways and the knowledge of where the land's cracks could hide small bodies. Aragorn navigated by instinct and grim study, but Mordor was a labyrinth of despair, and despair did not follow rules. At the same time, in Minas Tirith, Denethor sat in the high hall, white hair like a crown of frost, eyes too bright. He held a palantir of his own, hidden from all but his closest servants. He had used it often, more often than any should. It fed him truths wrapped in lies, and it made him feel powerful, even as it hollowed him. He had not yet learned of Boromir's death. He only knew his elder son had not returned. Every day without news sharpened Denethor's fear into anger. When at last a messenger arrived with grim tidings, Boromir slain near the Anduin, the Fellowship scattered, Denethor's grief did not soften him. It hardened him. "Faramir," he demanded. "In Ithilien," the messenger said. He spoke to Aragorn. Denethor's head snapped up. "Aragorn," he said, and his voice turned venomous. "That wandering chieftain. He was with a halfling," the man added, hesitant, "and an elf and a dwarf." Denethor's eyes narrowed. Pieces clicked together. "A halfling," he murmured. The word tasted like nonsense, and yet he had dreamed of small hands holding great doom. He rose abruptly, cloak sweeping like a shadow. "Bring Faramir home," he ordered, "at once." The messenger bowed and fled, relief and dread mixed. In the streets below, ordinary people smelled smoke from the Pelinor's watchfires and heard distant thunder that was not thunder. A woman carrying bread paused to listen to the bells, her child tugging her sleeve. "Is it war?" the child whispered. "It is always war," the woman said, and her voice was tired. At Helm's Deep, the wall fell. The Uruk-hai poured in like floodwater. The defenders were pushed back into the glittering caves, where screams echoed off stone. Children cried. Horses reared, eyes rolling white. The air was thick with smoke and wet blood. Theoden fought on the steps, sword rising and falling with the stubborn rhythm of a man who had found his courage too late to save what it loved. The Eomer's voice rang hoarse with orders. Men died with their backs to women and old folk, trying to hold a line that could not hold. At dawn, Gandalf returned with what riders he could gather. He charged into the Uruk-hai's flank like a spear of light, and for a moment hope flared. But Saruman's army was larger than in any telling. Without the Ents tearing Isengard's guts out, Orthanc had poured forth more and more Uruks, disciplined and grim. The battle did not turn into a rout. It turned into a slaughter that simply shifted direction. By noon, the Uruk-hai withdrew in grim order, not broken, but repositioning, leaving Helm's Deep battered, its defenders shattered. Theoden lived, but half his people lay dead. The survivors stared at piles of bodies and felt no triumph. The fortress had not been saved. It had been spared. Gandalf stood amid the ruin and felt the weight of time again. He looked east, toward where Frodo should have been, and he wondered what road Aragorn had chosen. He did not know. That ignorance was a new and bitter thing. In Isengard, Merry and Pippin made their own attempt. On a night when the wind howled around Orthanc and rain lashed the stones, Merry feigned sickness, collapsing dramatically when guards came to drag them to another interrogation. When the guard leaned close, Pippin bit his hand with desperate ferocity. The guard yelped. Merry kicked his knee. For a heartbeat, they had a gap, a chance. They ran, barefoot on slick stone, breath tearing in their throats. They darted down a stairwell into a corridor that stank of wet wool and old food. While behind them, shouts rose. They nearly made it to a side door before Wormtongue appeared, lantern held high, face pale. "Stop," he hissed, and his voice shook. Merry froze. Pippin grabbed a thrown cloak from a peg, trying to hide, trying to become invisible by sheer will. Wormtongue looked at them, then looked over his shoulder toward the sound of approaching boots. Something like panic moved behind his eyes. He was a man who had chosen the winning side too early, and now he feared it might devour him. "I could help you," Wormtongue whispered, and the words came out like a confession. Merry stared at him, disbelief and suspicion tangled. "Why?" he demanded, and it was one of the rare times his voice held real force. Wormtongue swallowed. "Because Saruman will lose," he whispered, "or he will win, and then he will not need me. Either way." His voice trailed off. He looked at Pippin's small, shaking hands. "Either way, I die." It was a betrayal offered in fear, not in goodness, but fear could still open doors. Boots thundered nearer. Wormtongue shoved a key into Merry's hand. "Down!" he hissed. "To the water gate. There is a drain that leads out. Go, and do not speak my name." Merry hesitated only a fraction, then grabbed Pippin and ran, following Wormtongue's frantic gestures. Behind them, Wormtongue lifted his lantern and turned toward the guards, forcing a smile. They went that way. He lied smoothly, pointing in the wrong direction. In that instant, Wormtongue betrayed Saruman. It was small, late, and motivated by self-preservation. But it mattered. Merry and Pippin crawled through a drain that stank of filth and stagnant water. Rats scurried past, their fur slick. The Pippin gagged, but Merry forced him onward. They emerged outside Isengard under a sky that had cleared to hard stars. The ring of Isengard's walls loomed behind them, black and implacable. The plain beyond lay open, grass silvered by moonlight. Freedom, sudden and terrifying. "Which way?" Pippin whispered. Merry looked at the horizon. He had no map, no ranger skills, no guide. Only a stubborn heart and the knowledge that somewhere, somehow, their friends were walking into hell. "Anywhere but here," he said, and they ran into the night. They did not know that Saruman, furious at their escape, would send riders and wolves, not only after them, but westward toward the Shire. Because Merry's scream into the Palantir had planted a location into more minds than Saruman alone. On the plains of Mordor, Frodo's strength began to fail. The ring weighed more with every step, and now he carried not only the ring, but the grief of Gimli's death and the horror of Gollum's end. Sam watched him sway and stumble, and felt rage at the unfairness of it all. Aragorn carried part of Frodo's pack when Frodo could not. Legolas scouted ahead, eyes narrowed against Ashlarden wind, his fair hair dulled by soot. They moved at night when possible, hiding in slag heaps and shallow pits by day. Once, as they lay pressed into a hollow, while an orc patrol passed close enough that Sam could smell their breath, Frodo suddenly whispered, "Do you hear it?" Sam's eyes widened. "Hear what?" Frodo's gaze was fixed on nothing. "It is calling," he whispered. "It knows." Aragorn leaned close. "Do not listen," he murmured fiercely. "Listen to me." Frodo's eyes met his, and for a moment Frodo looked like a child again, frightened and trusting. Then the moment passed. The ring warmed and Frodo's expression hardened. Legolas returned from scouting with grim news. "We are too far south," he said. "The land ahead is open. There are roads of stone and towers. We will be seen." Aragorn closed his eyes briefly, calculating. "Then we must risk the road," he said. "Or we fail." Sam swallowed. "And when we get there," he whispered, "what then? What happens at the fire?" No one answered. The question was too large. It had been planted since Rivendell and watered with every mile. Now it loomed, unavoidable. Would Frodo be able to destroy it? Would anyone? In Minas Tirith, Faramir returned to his father and found Denethor more brittle than ever. The steward's grief for Boromir had turned into contempt for Faramir, because grief often seeks a scapegoat. You let them go, Denethor said, voice cold. You let Isildur's heir walk free, and you did not seize the halfling. I did not know what he carried, Faramir replied, though part of him suspected now. And even if I had, I would not have taken it. Denethor's eyes flashed. You would not have saved your city, he spat. You would not have done what Boromir would. Faramir flinched, but he held steady. Boromir is dead, he said softly, and I will not dishonor him by becoming what he feared he was becoming. Denethor's hand clenched on the arm of his chair. For a heartbeat, something like shame flickered, then pride smothered it. Go, he said. Do what you will. It will not matter. Outside, the sky over the Pelennor darkened with smoke. The first Nazgul cry was heard, distant but unmistakable, and people in the streets stopped and looked up, faces pale. In their mouths, the air tasted of ash, though Mordor lay far away. On the road to the Black Gate, Sauron's armies moved. Without Isengard broken, without Saruman distracted by his own siege, Mordor's forces coordinated more smoothly with the West's treacheries. Black banners moved in the wind. Easterlings marched in tight ranks. Southrons came with scarlet and gold, their armor catching light like flame. The siege of Minas Tirith began under a sky that seemed bruised. Great stones from engines smashed into walls with a sound like mountains cracking. The city shook. Men shouted orders through smoke. Oil boiled. Horses screamed. And Denethor, watching from his high place, felt despair wrap around him like a cloak. In his mind, through the Palantir, Sauron showed him visions. Aragorn taking the ring and claiming the throne. Denethor cast down the White City, burning no matter what he did. Faramir dead, always dead, because hope was a cruelty. Denethor's hands trembled. All is lost, he whispered. And the words were a betrayal more profound than worm tongues, because they came from the man who was meant to endure. In Mordor, the small company drew near at last to the slopes of Orodruin. Mount Doom loomed, a jagged giant breathing smoke and fire. The ground underfoot grew warm. The air shimmered with heat. Ash fell in steady sheets. Frodo's breath was a rasp. His face was grey. His eyes were too large, too fixed. Sam's hands were raw from helping him. Aragorn's lips were cracked, his shoulders bowed, yet his eyes remained fiercely alert. Legolas looked diminished, as if the land had drained colour from him. At the base of the mountain they found a path, narrow and cruel, winding upward through broken rock. Orcs moved in the distance, but the land here was strangely empty, as if even the servants of the enemy avoided the mountain's breath. They climbed. As they climbed, Frodo began to whisper again, words that did not quite make sense. So close, he murmured. So close to home. Sam heard and felt cold despite the heat. Home, he whispered, horrified. This is not home, Mr. Frodo. Frodo did not seem to hear. Near the entrance to Samath Nar, they were nearly caught. An orc patrol rounded a bend unexpectedly, and for a heartbeat, both groups stared, shock freezing them. Then the orcs snarled and raised weapons. Aragorn surged forward with a roar, and Duril flashing. Legolas' knife struck quick, silent. Sam, astonishing himself, drove his small blade into an orc's thigh and screamed with effort and fear. Frodo stumbled behind them, clutching his chest. They killed the patrol, but the sound echoed. Shouts rose in the distance. The mountain itself seemed to wake. Go! Aragorn shouted to Frodo. Now! Frodo staggered into the dark mouth of the Crack's chamber. Sam followed. Legolas moved to cover, eyes scanning. Aragorn stood at the entrance, sword up, holding the narrow way. "Aragorn!" Sam cried back, voice breaking. "Come!" Aragorn's face was grim. "I will hold them," he said. "If I fall, do not stop." It was a moment that could have been an ending. The King Tob standing against darkness so the ring-bearer could finish the tale. But Middle-earth was not done taking. Inside the chamber, firelight painted the walls in violent orange. The heat was immense. The air tasted of metal and smoke. A narrow ledge ran over a chasm of molten fire. Frodo stood at the edge, swaying. The ring hung from its chain again, but now it felt like it was part of his flesh. He held it up, and the gold caught the firelight and glowed like a small sun. Sam stood behind him, tears carving clean tracks through ash on his face. "Mr. Frodo," he whispered, voice pleading, "please, throw it in. Finish it." Frodo's hand trembled, his face contorted, pain and longing warring. The ring's whisper was no longer subtle. It roared in his mind like a chorus. He turned his head slightly and his eyes met Sam's. "I have come this far," Frodo said, and his voice was steady in a way that terrified Sam. "I will not do it." Sam's heart seemed to stop. "What?" he whispered, as if he had not heard correctly. Frodo's mouth tightened. "It is mine," he said. The betrayal was not Frodo's alone. It was the ring's triumph, the inevitable end of every mile. It was the answer to a question planted long ago. Could any creature, however good, carry such a thing to the edge of fire and remain untouched? The answer, at the last, was no. Outside, Aragorn heard the orcs coming, heard their boots and snarls. He shouted, "Frodo!" But his voice was swallowed by the mountain's roar. Legolas fought beside him, moving like a blade of light in a place where light did not belong. Yet the orcs were many, and they came with desperation, driven by Nazgul cries overhead. Aragorn's mind flashed to the chamber inside, to Frodo at the edge. He felt suddenly, with sick certainty, what was happening. The ring would claim its bearer at the last. It always did. It had claimed Isildur. It had almost claimed Boromir. It whispered now to Aragorn too, not only of power, but of necessity. If Frodo could not do it, who could? Aragorn shoved an orc back and slammed the point of Andúril through its throat. Black blood sprayed. He turned, and for a heartbeat, he looked into Legolas' eyes. Legolas understood. The elf's face tightened with grief. "Do not," Legolas said, and it echoed Gimli's last whisper. Aragorn's voice was raw. "Then tell me," he snarled. "What else is there?" Legolas' jaw clenched. He did not answer because there was no answer that did not taste like ash. Inside, Sam took a step toward Frodo, hands out. "Mr. Frodo," he begged, "give it to me. Just let me hold it. You can rest." Frodo's eyes flared, suddenly cruel. "No," he snapped. "You want it. You want to be the hero. You want to go back and be Samwise the Great." Sam recoiled as if slapped. The words were not Frodo's, not truly, but they came through Frodo's mouth all the same. Sam's chest ached. "I just want you back," he whispered. Frodo turned away, clutching the ring. He slipped it onto his finger. He vanished. For a heartbeat, Sam stood frozen, staring at empty air. Then he heard Frodo's footsteps on the ledge, and a faint laugh, and the crackling whisper of the ring's delight. Outside, the Nazgul screamed, and the sound pierced even the mountain's roar. The eye had turned suddenly, sharply, toward its own heart. The ground shook. Aragorn felt it, a vibration through stone into bone. He looked up, and for a moment, he saw the sky above Mordor tear open with a shift of cloud, as if the world itself had flinched. "It knows," Legolas whispered, and for the first time in many ages, the elf sounded truly afraid. Orcs surged forward, emboldened by the Nazgul cry. Aragorn fought like a man already dead, because in that moment he believed they had failed. But failure did not come in the way he expected. Inside the chamber, a shape appeared out of the shadows near the ledge. An orc, drawn by the commotion, eyes wide with greed. It could not see Frodo, but it could hear. It lunged wildly, blade out, and struck empty air. There was a cry, Frodo's cry, followed by a scuffle. Sam ran forward, blind with panic, and collided with something unseen. He grabbed at air and felt cloth, then flesh. Frodo's body was there, trembling. "Mr. Frodo!" Sam shouted, clutching him. Frodo struggled, and in the struggle the ring slipped off his finger. It clinked against stone and rolled toward the edge. Time stretched thin. Sam saw it, a glint of gold in firelight, rolling, almost stopping. Frodo's invisible hand reached for it. The orc, frantic, scrabbled too, not understanding but driven by desire like a dog chasing scent. Sam threw himself forward. His fingers closed over the ring. The moment he touched it, the world changed. The chamber seemed to widen, and in the fire he saw visions. The Shire green and safe, Samwise returning as a lord, gardens blooming where ash had fallen, rosy cottons smiling, children laughing. He saw himself strong, respected, never again small and afraid. It was a lie so sweet it almost broke him. Sam's face twisted. Tears streamed down. "I cannot," he whispered, and it was not to Frodo, but to the ring, to temptation itself. He turned, stumbled to the edge, and with a sound that was half sob, half roar, he flung the ring into the fire. For a heartbeat, it seemed to hang in the air, gold bright against red. Then it fell, swallowed by flame. A sound like the world cracking open echoed through the chamber and beyond. The mountain roared. The air screamed. The earth heaved as if trying to throw Mordor off its back. Outside, Aragorn felt the shockwave. Orcs staggered, clutching heads, shrieking. The Nazgul cries turned from triumph to terror, and one by one they faltered in the sky like black leaves in a gale. Far away in Barad-dûr, the eye blazed, then widened in disbelief, then collapsed inward as if pierced. Sauron's power shattered not with a clean ending, but with a violent unraveling. Towers trembled. Orcs wailed and fled. The very land convulsed, cracks opening, fire spurting. Aragorn fell to one knee, gasping, not from a wound, but from the sudden lifting of a pressure he had carried so long he had forgotten it was there. Legolas grabbed his arm and hauled him up. Inside, Aragorn shouted, and he ran into the chamber, heedless of falling stone. He found Sam on the ledge, clutching Frodo's limp body. Frodo's eyes were open but unfocused, as if the world had drained out of them. Sam's face was a ruin of ash and tears. "It is done," Sam whispered, voice shaking with disbelief. "It is gone." Relief hit Aragorn so hard it was almost pain. He sank beside them, one hand on Frodo's shoulder, as if grounding him in the world again. Legolas stood over them, breathing hard, listening to the mountain's rage. Then disquiet crept in, thin as smoke. The chamber shook. Rocks fell. Fire surged higher. The path out would not remain. "We must go," Legolas said sharply. Aragorn lifted Frodo, though Frodo weighed more than he should, as if loss had mass. Sam stumbled along, half carrying, half dragged. Legolas led them through the collapsing tunnel, moving with frantic grace. Outside, the sky over Mordor split with lightning. Mount Doom vomited fire and ash. The plain cracked, and rivers of molten rock crawled like glowing snakes. They ran. They did not run alone. Orcs ran too, shrieking, weapons thrown away. Great beasts bellowed and collapsed. The air was full of choking ash. Sam coughed until he tasted blood. At the last ridge before the plain broke apart entirely, Aragorn turned and looked back toward Barad-dûr. He saw it sway, a black tooth loosening, then fall, the tower collapsing into a storm of dust and shadow. For a moment, the shape of a vast hand seemed to reach up from the ruin, clawing at the sky. Then it dissolved into nothing. The world exhaled. But as they stumbled toward whatever safety could exist in that land, Aragorn felt the weight of what had been paid. Gimli was dead. Boromir lay forgotten under leaves. Merry and Pippin were alone in the wild, hunted. Rohan bled. Gondor burned. Victory had come, yes, but not like sunlight after storm. It came like the quiet after a house collapses, when survivors stand in dust and realize they are alive and do not yet know what living will cost. In Gondor, the siege broke as Mordor's will shattered. The great shadow that had pressed on the city lifted, and men on the walls wept with sudden, bewildered relief. The Nazgul cries ceased. Orcs in the field faltered, then fled, leaderless. But Denethor did not rejoice. He had already stepped too far into despair. In his high chamber, with firelight flickering, he looked into his palantir one last time and saw not victory, but humiliation. The line of kings returning, and the steward's rule ending, his own life reduced to a footnote. He saw Faramir living, and it did not comfort him because it did not fit his narrative of loss. He lit a pyre anyway. Servants shouted. Guards ran. Faramir burst into the chamber, horror on his face. "Father," he cried. Denethor's eyes were wild. "You are not enough," he whispered. And then the flames took him, a last betrayal against hope itself. In Rohan, Theoden lived to hear that the shadow had fallen, and the news hit him like rain on a fire. He sat amid the ruins of his people and laughed once, harshly, then covered his face with his hands. Yoma stood beside him, staring out over graves that would never be counted properly. "So we won," Yoma said, and it sounded like a question. Theoden's voice was old. "We survived," he said. "That is not the same." On the plains west of Isengard, Merry and Pippin crept through tall grass, feet torn, mouths dry. They had stolen a crust of bread from a careless guard and fought over it without meaning to, hunger making animals of them for a moment. Then they had apologized, embarrassed by their own desperation. Now they hid as wolves passed, sniffing, eyes gleaming. Merry held Pippin's mouth closed to stop a whimper. His own heart hammered so loud he feared it would betray them. When the wolves moved on, Pippin whispered, "Do you think anyone is coming?" Merry stared at the stars. "No," he whispered, and forced himself to say the truth. "We have to go to them." "To who?" Pippin asked, voice tiny. Merry swallowed. "To anyone," he said. "To Rohan, to Gondor, to the Shire. We have to warn them. Saruman knows." They did not know then that Saruman's own power had begun to crack. When Sauron fell, Saruman lost his greatest leverage, his greatest excuse, his greatest mirror. He was still dangerous, still cunning, still hateful. But now his ambition had no clear master to flatter and no clear enemy to bargain with. That made him more erratic, not less. Worm-tongue, having betrayed him once, became a hunted man within the very walls he had served. He hid in stables, slept among straw, and listened to Saruman's voice echo through stone corridors like a curse. In the days that followed, Aragorn, Legolas, Sam, and Frodo were found by eagles drawn by the mountain's upheaval and by Gandalf's searching will. They were carried out of Mordor's ruin into cleaner air, and when Sam felt wind that did not taste of ash, he sobbed openly, face buried against Frodo's shoulder. Frodo did not sob. He stared at the sky, eyes too wide, as if expecting the eye to appear there again. The ring was gone, but something of it remained like a phantom limb, a constant ache. Aragorn lay on the eagle's back, hair whipped by wind, and looked down at the land. He thought of Gimli's laughter in the mines. He thought of Boromir's desperate honor. He thought of Merry and Pippin's missing faces. He thought of the choice he had made at Amon Hen, and felt no certainty that it had been right, only that it had been made. When they reached Minas Tirith, the city greeted Aragorn with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. The people were thin, eyes shadowed, clothes stained with smoke. They cheered anyway, because people cheer not only for victory, but to convince themselves they have something left. Aragorn did not enter like a conqueror. He entered like a man returning late to a duty he had nearly abandoned. He knelt at the white tree and touched its bark, and his hand shook. Legolas walked the streets and heard the city's sounds, hammering, weeping, prayers, laughter that sounded fragile. He felt the sea wind faintly and knew he would leave one day, because elves always did. But he also felt a hollowness where Gimli's presence should have been, a silence that no sea could fill. Sam stayed near Frodo, rarely leaving his side. At night, he sat by Frodo's bed and listened to Frodo's breathing, afraid it would stop. He did not speak of what happened at the fire, not fully. He could not. When he closed his eyes, he felt the ring's smooth gold again and hated himself for having wanted its lies for even a heartbeat. Frodo healed in body, but not in spirit. Sometimes he woke screaming, hands clawing at his chest. Sometimes he whispered, "Mine," and then sobbed, horrified at himself. Aragorn sat with him once in the quiet of a garden, and Frodo stared at a small white flower as if it were a miracle. "I failed," Frodo whispered. Aragorn's voice was gentle. "You carried it farther than any should," he said, "and you did not do the final act, but you made the final act possible." Frodo's eyes filled. "Sam did it," he whispered. "Sam saved us." Aragorn looked away toward the city's walls. "Then remember that," he said. "Remember that greatness can be small." Weeks later, news came at last. Merry and Pippin lived. They had reached Rohan in tatters and been taken in by riders who stared at them as if at ghosts. They told their tale in hoarse voices, and Gandalf listened with a face that grew grim at the mention of Saruman, knowing the Shire. The relief in Minas Tirith was real and warm. 2 lives returned from a path that should have ended in darkness. Yet disquiet followed, because their news carried a shadow westward. Saruman, stripped of his grand alliance, turned fully to spite. He fled Isengard before the victors could bind him, slipping away with a handful of loyal ruffians, and Wormtongue dragged like a leash behind him. He did not go east. He went west, toward the Shire. In the Shire, spring arrived as it always had, soft rain and bright green, birdsong and the smell of turned earth. Hobbits planted and baked and argued over fences. They had heard rumors of war like distant thunder, but war felt like something that happened to big folk far away. Then strangers began to appear on the roads, Men with hard eyes, speaking roughly, taking food without paying, cutting down trees as if they held grudges against wood. Smoke rose from new kilns. The water in the bywater ran foul. Old Hamfast Gamgee spat and muttered about chiefs and new rules. Rosie Cotton felt a chill she could not name when she saw a tall, bent figure in a hood speaking softly to a group of ruffians outside the Green Dragon. It was Saruman, smaller than legend now, but no less poisonous. His voice still had a kind of music, and it made foolish men feel clever to obey him. Wormtongue followed behind, eyes darting, face hollow with fear and resentment. Sometimes he looked at the hobbit holes with a longing that surprised him. Ordinary life, stupid and safe. There had a beauty he had never noticed until he had lost any chance of it. Merry and Pippin returned to the Shire with warning and steel in their hands, hardened by what they had seen, eyes older. They found their land under quiet occupation, and rage took them like fire. They gathered hobbits. They taught them to stand in lines. They set watches. They smelled smoke and heard axes, and every sound felt like an insult. When at last Saruman was confronted on the road near Bag End, the air was crisp with autumn, leaves spinning down like little deaths. Hobbits stood trembling but determined, pitchforks and hunting bows raised. Merry's voice was steady when he spoke. "This is our home," he said. "You will leave." Saruman's laugh was soft. "Home," he murmured. "A little word for little people. Do you know what your friends did while you played at war?" His eyes gleamed as he looked at Sam, who had returned at last, carrying Frodo's grief like a quiet shadow. "Do you know what was done at the fire? Do you know who really destroyed the ring?" Sam froze. His face went white. Frodo's hand tightened on his cloak, a tremor passing through him. Merry's eyes narrowed. "Do not listen," he said, but the seed had been tossed. Saruman smiled, savouring it. "Ask him," he whispered. "Ask your gardener what he held, what he wanted, what he threw away at the last moment." Sam's throat worked. He could not speak. The Shire's air smelled of apples and wood smoke, and yet Sam tasted Mordor again. Frodo stepped forward, voice thin but clear. "It does not matter," he said. "It is gone." Saruman's eyes flashed with hatred. "It matters," he hissed. "It always matters. You broke the world, and now you want peace." Then Wormtongue, shaking, moved. Something inside him snapped, not into courage, but into exhaustion. He saw Saruman's contempt, felt years of humiliation, and suddenly he could not bear it. He drew a knife and plunged it into Saruman's back. Saruman gasped, a small shocked sound. He turned, eyes wide, and for a moment there was something almost human there, disbelief that his servant would dare. He fell to the road, white robes pooling, blood dark against dust. Wormtongue stood over him, panting, eyes wild, knife dripping. For a heartbeat, the Shire was silent, except for a distant crow calling. Then hobbits surged, ruffians fled, and the little land erupted into brief, sharp violence. Wormtongue tried to run and was shot down by a hobbit arrow that thudded into his chest with a sound like a door closing. Saruman lay dying, eyes fixed on the sky. His lips moved, and perhaps he tried to speak a spell, or a curse, or a regret. A grey mist rose from his mouth and drifted upward, and for a moment it shaped itself like a hand reaching west, seeking escape. Then a wind came from the sea, and it blew the mist away, and it did not return. Relief spread through the Shire like sunlight after rain. The occupiers were gone. The trees would grow again, though some stumps would never be forgotten. The water could be cleaned. doors could be unbarred. Yet the disquiet remained, because some knowledge could not be unlearned. Sam stood by the party tree, hands trembling, looking at the place where Saruman's blood had soaked into dust. Merry and Pippin stood nearby, faces grim. Frodo leaned against a fence, eyes distant. Merry spoke quietly, and his voice held no accusation, only weariness. "Did you?" he asked Sam. "Or did you destroy it?" Sam swallowed, throat tight. He looked at Frodo, and the memory of Frodo saying, "It is mine," cut through him like cold. "I did," Sam said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "But only because Mr. Frodo could not. And I almost did not." Pippin exhaled shakily. "So, it was you," he whispered, awe and fear tangled. Sam's eyes filled. "It was all of us," he said fiercely. "It was Mr. Frodo carrying it. It was Mr. Aragorn bleeding for it. It was Mr. Gimli dying for it. It was everything." Frodo turned away and his shoulders shook, silent tears falling. The Shire's green hills rolled under a pale sky, peaceful and unchanged in shape, but the people standing under that tree were no longer the same. In the years that followed, Aragorn was crowned, and Gondor and Rohan rebuilt slowly, stone by stone, grave by grave. The Legolas remained a while, helping, watching the new age begin with eyes that had seen too many endings. He visited Gimli's cairn in the Far East, in his mind more often than he ever spoke of it, and sometimes his hand would close as if around a missing friend's shoulder. Merry and Pippin became leaders in their small land, not because they sought power, but because they had learned what happens when decent folk refuse to stand. They laughed again sometimes, but the laughter had an edge now, like a blade kept sharp. Sam married Rosie and planted gardens that turned scars into green. He became, in time, exactly what Saruman had mocked, a hobbit of consequence. Yet sometimes, when his children slept and the house was quiet, Sam would sit alone and stare at his hands, remembering how the ring had felt, remembering how close he had come to loving it. Frodo never fully healed. The world had been saved, but his own inner world remained partly in shadow. He would stand on a hill and look east, eyes distant, as if listening for a voice that was gone, but not forgotten. He loved the Shire fiercely, and that love hurt him because it reminded him of what he could not regain: simplicity. One evening, long after the last ruffian had fled and the last burnt beam had been replaced, a cold wind came unexpectedly out of the west. Leaves fell in a sudden shower, spinning down around Bag End like little brown boats. Frodo stood at his door and watched them. Sam came to stand beside him. The air smelled of earth and distant rain. "Do you think it is really over?" Sam asked softly, and the question was not about orcs or towers. It was about the way darkness lingered inside even after the sun returned. Frodo did not answer quickly. His eyes followed a single leaf as it drifted down and settled on the threshold, trembling in the wind. At the fire, Frodo whispered at last. I felt the world bend toward it. Everything, everyone. And when it was gone, I still felt the bend, as if the world remembers. Sam swallowed. He wanted to say something hopeful, something that would close the story neatly. But he could not lie to Frodo, and he could not lie to himself. The gardens will grow, Sam said instead, and his voice was steady because it had to be, and we will do what we can. Frodo nodded, almost imperceptibly. He lifted his foot and stepped over the leaf into his home as if crossing a line he could never cross back. Outside, the Shire settled into night. Crickets chirped. A distant owl called. The stars came out, bright and indifferent. And far away, beyond the green and the hills and the clean rivers, in the lands where ash had once fallen like snow, a single crack in black stone still breathed out a thread of smoke that did not belong to any fire now lit by living hands.